Hi guys, so today we're going to be going over the topic open source. First off, I'm going to go through this overview of the topics that I'll be talking about today. I'm going to first off start with an introduction and define what exactly is open source and how exactly it works. Then I will provide some examples of open source software. And then I'll talk about the open source licenses and the different types. And provide some examples as well. Next, I'll talk about the open source versus free source and commercial source. Then I'll talk about the benefits and the advantages. And last but not least, I will end this with the conclusion of the topic of open source. So first off, let's start off with an introduction of what exactly is open source. So open source software is a free software for your business or personal use. Open source developers freely share their knowledge and make the source code available to the public. The software is distributed with the license, which allows other developers to modify it and or add to it.
2017.
And what I mean by it's freely available to the public, free doesn't mean you can download it for free. But I'll go further into detail about it later on throughout the video. And it's helpful to its users, so whether a program is open source or not, it doesn't just matter to its developers, it ultimately matters for users too. Open source software licenses give users freedoms they would not otherwise have. So let's get an actual definition of what exactly open source is. Open source software, or OSS, is a computer software with its source code made available with a license in which the copyright holder provides the rights to study, change, and distribute the software to anyone and for any purpose. Open source software is a software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance. The source code is the part of software that most computer users don't ever see. It's the actual program code that the developer created, and it's the code computer programmers can manipulate to change how a piece of software, a program or application, works. The programmers who have access to a computer program's source code can improve that program by adding features to it or fixing parts that don't always work correctly. So what exactly does this mean, or how does this work? The software usually includes a license for programmers to change the software in any way they choose. They can fix the bugs, improve functions, or adapt the software to suit their own needs. If a program is open source, its source code is freely available to its users. Its users and anyone else have the ability to take this source code, modify it, and distribute their own versions of the program. The users also have the ability to distribute as many copies of the original program as they want. Anyone can use the program for any purpose. There are no licensing fees or other restrictions on the software.
That was even more recent.
So what are examples of open source software? Below I've provided a list that some that you may even know, such as Mozilla's Firefox web browser, Thunderbird email client, PHP scripting language, Python programming language, or Apache HTTP web server. So let's go further on and talk about the open source licenses. Open source software is protected by copyright. Although the license does not demand any money, this does not mean that there are no conditions. Almost all open source licenses require a user to reproduce the name of the author, typically in the form of a copyright notice, but whenever he distributes the work or incorporates it in a commercial product. Open source licenses are licenses that comply with the open source definition. In brief, they allow software to be freely used, modified, and shared. In general, open source licenses grant computer users permission to use open source software for any purpose they wish. It needs to be approved by the Open Source Initiative, also known as the OSI, that a license must go through the Open Source Initiative's license review process. Some open source licenses, what some other people call copyleft licenses, stipulate that anyone who releases a modified open source program must also release the source code for that program alongside it. Moreover, some open source licenses stipulate that anyone who alters and shares a program with others must also share that program's source code without charging a licensing fee for it. Even by design, open source software licenses promote collaboration and sharing because they permit other people to make modifications to source code and incorporate those changes into their own projects. They encourage computer programmers to access, view, and modify open source software whenever they like, as long as they let others do the same when they share their work. So what exactly are some examples of open source licenses? Here we have the MIT license, GNU or the General Public License GPL 2.0, Apache License 2.0, GNU General Public License GPL 3.0.
Turned on. Oh yeah, it's getting added into my list.
So what exactly is the difference between open source software versus free software? Contrary to popular belief, neither focuses on the cost of lack thereof of the programs. The Free Software Camp, led by Richmond Stallman and the Free Software Foundation, focuses on the ethics and morals of using software that can be controlled and modified by the user. In other words, the Free Software Camp focuses on user freedoms. Open source entails the free availability of source code and distribution. Free software, free means free as in freedom, not free as in beer. It includes code modification but emphasizes the freedom users to enjoy to do what they like with the software. The Free Software Foundation outlines 4 conditions for software to be considered completely free. In addition, software can be classified as freeware. This means that users download the software at no cost, but they cannot make any changes to its source code. So what exactly is the difference between open source software and commercial software? Open source software generally is free or has a low-cost licensing option. Commercial software, on the other hand, requires purchasing a license. The upfront license cost of a commercial CMS could run from a few $1,000s to tens or even hundreds of thousands. Some offer a 30-day free trial, which can still be expensive because that might not be enough time to get up to speed, which could force you to make a buying decision before being ready to do so. In contrast, many open source programs are free, so you can take all the time you need to learn how they work. Buying commercial software doesn't mean you own it. It's also important to realize that you don't actually own it, but you're granted a license. If you have any doubts, take a look at the EULA, or the End User License Agreement, which comes with the software. So what exactly are some benefits and advantages? So open source software allows you to make choices and addresses vulnerabilities, bug fixes, enhancements, and more. These high-quality results are when the source code is passed around, tested, and fixed. So you can modify the software as necessary for your own purposes. It is also a valuable learning opportunity for programmers. They can learn and apply skills to the most popular programs available today. Many consider open source software more secure than proprietary software because bugs are identified and fixed quickly. Since open software is in the public domain, there is little chance it can become unavailable. There is important for long-term projects that rely on these tools for the duration of the project. And last but not least, most of the software is free. Costs may arise later, however, such as subscriptions or support fees.
After 4 days. That's a fucking...
So basically, the conclusion of this is that using open source software offers various advantages, such as the ability to reduce costs and development time, or to avoid being dependent or a single vendor. The software is freely available for anyone, including a source code. The license grants everyone permission to adapt or improve the source code, for example, to fix errors, or to make a more efficient implementation, or to add completely new functionality. The software may also be copied and distributed freely, even in modified form. The author does not charge for this. The software is freely available on the internet. It is even allowed to charge for distributing someone else's open software without having to share any of the revenue with the original author. And with a careful application of the license conditions, it is possible to benefit most from using open source software while minimizing the risk.